I've been an SAR officer for several years now, and in my line of work, I've encountered some things that still haunt me to this day. Some cases are just tragic accidents, but a few are different. These are the stories that still keep me awake at night, that push me to work harder, to search longer, and to never give up, no matter how strange or impossible the situation may seem. The first case: the missing children. It started like any other day. A little boy and his sister went missing while berry picking with their parents. The parents lost sight of them for just a few seconds, and that's all it took. We found the girl first, but when we asked her where her brother was, she said something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. She said he had been taken by the bear man. She described him as tall, covered in hair like a bear, with a strange, unsettling face. The girl was calm, almost too calm, and insisted that her brother was okay, riding on the man's shoulders, playing along with him. At first, we thought it was a case of abduction. We scoured the area, hoping to find any trace of the boy. But there was nothing. No footprints, no signs of struggle, no trace of another person at all. We searched that forest for weeks, but we never found him. The whole thing just felt wrong. Like the woods had swallowed them both whole, and no one knew why. The second case: the vanishing hiker. The second case was even stranger. A young woman went hiking with her mother and grandfather. The mother said her daughter had climbed up a tree to get a better view, but she never came back down. They waited for hours, calling her name, but she was just gone. No sign of her anywhere. No sounds, no movements. I couldn't wrap my head around it. There was no evidence that she came down from that tree, no clues as to where she went. She had just vanished into thin air, as though she had never been there at all. Her family was devastated, but for us, there was no answer. We looked everywhere, but it was as if she had simply disappeared. The cliffs that lead nowhere. Sometimes things don't make sense. A few times, I've had dogs leading me on searches, and they've taken me to places that were impossible to climb. These weren't hills or rocky slopes, they were sheer cliffs, completely vertical, with no way up or down. We'd follow the dog, only to end up on the other side of the cliff, or miles away from where we had started. It's bizarre. Maybe there's an explanation, but when you're out there, in the thick of the woods, sometimes you just have to accept that you may never fully understand. The tragic accident. Then there was the 9-year-old girl who fell down an embankment and got impaled on a dead tree. It was a freak accident, a heartbreaking tragedy. But what haunts me the most is the sound her mother made when we told her. I'll never forget the way she screamed, a gut-wrenching wail that echoed through the forest. It was as if her whole world had shattered in an instant. I heard later that she took her own life a few weeks after losing her daughter. I don't think she could live with the pain, the climbing trip, and the man with no face. One of the most chilling stories I've encountered was about a guy who got stuck on a mountain during a solo climbing trip. When we found him, he had a broken leg and had been stuck there for 2 days. But that's not what haunted him. He told us that when he reached the top, a man appeared, dressed in a parka and ski pants, no climbing gear at all. The man turned around, and the climber said he had no face. Just nothing. He freaked out, trying to escape too quickly, and that's how he got hurt. But it wasn't just that encounter. He could hear the faceless man all night, climbing down the mountain behind him, making these horrible muffled screams. I don't know if the guy was hallucinating from dehydration, but that story stuck with me. I never want to experience anything like that in the woods. The woman and the black-eyed man. One of the strangest encounters I had during a search was with a young woman who had gotten separated from her hiking group. It was late at night by the time we picked up her scent. We found her huddled under a decaying log, clearly in shock, no injuries, but missing her shoes and backpack. We helped her back to base ops, but something was off. As we walked, she kept looking behind us, asking why that big man with black eyes was following us. Of course, we couldn't see anyone, so we chalked it up to shock, but the closer we got to base, the more agitated she became. She started saying that this man was making faces at her, and at one point, she stopped dead in her tracks, turned around, and started yelling into the trees, telling him to leave her alone, that she wouldn't go with him. It got worse as we neared base ops. I'll never forget the look on her face when she turned to me. her eyes wide, as if she was seeing something I couldn't. She touched my shoulder and whispered, "He says to tell you to speed up. He doesn't like looking at the scar on your neck." I've got a small scar on the base of my neck, nothing visible unless I'm not wearing a collar, but there's no way she could have seen it. Right after she said it, I heard that strange coughing sound right in my ear. I nearly jumped out of my skin. I hustled her to ops, not showing how freaked out I was, but I can tell you, I was relieved to leave that area behind. The staircases in the wilderness. Now, here's the weirdest thing I've ever encountered, and I'm not sure if other SAR officers talk about this, but I'll mention it. We're told not to, but it happens so often it's almost become normal. When we're deep into the wilderness, 30 or 40 miles out, we come across these staircases. Imagine taking the stairs from your house, cutting them out, and dropping them in the middle of the forest. That's exactly what they look like. I asked the first time I saw one, and the other officer just told me not to worry about it, that it was normal. That's the answer I got from everyone I asked. Some stairs are old, decrepit, barely standing. Others are brand new. I saw one set that looked like it came from a lighthouse. Spiral metal stairs, vintage. They don't go anywhere. They don't lead to a higher place, and some are even taller than others. I tried to take a look at them once, but my superior told me in no uncertain terms that we should never get close to them. Now, when I see them, I just ignore them. It happens so often, I don't even think twice anymore. But there's something about them that doesn't sit right with me. It's like they shouldn't be there, and I feel like something's watching when I pass by them. Clarification about the man with no face. A few of you asked about the man with no face. Let me clear that up. There was a climber who reached the top of a peak, and that's when he saw another man standing there. He was dressed in a parka and ski pants, but when the climber turned around, he realized the man had no face, nothing but smooth, blank skin. Freaked him out, obviously. The climber panicked, tried to get down the mountain too fast, and ended up falling. But the weird part? He could hear the faceless man all night long, climbing down behind him, making these awful muffled screams. I can't imagine hearing that, but I'm glad I wasn't there. Here are a few more stories I've been sitting on, and I'll be honest, these are the ones that still haunt me. Not all of them are the kind of things you can just explain away with logic. Some of these cases, well, they don't sit right with me, and I'm not sure they ever will. The missing hiker and the cane in the tree. We handle a lot of missing persons cases, but there's one that sticks with me more than any other. Most of the time, the cases are pretty straightforward. Someone strays from the trail, gets injured, or loses their bearings. But then there are the cases where you find something you just can't explain. This one involved an older man who had gone hiking alone. His wife called us when he didn't come home on time, worried that he'd had a seizure and gotten lost. We set up our search, and it didn't take long before one of the veterans found signs that he had gone off the trail. We quickly spread out, covering the area as efficiently as possible. Then, out of nowhere, a call came over the radio telling us to head back to the vet's location. This usually means we found the person, and they're injured but alive. But when we got there, we were met with something bizarre. The vet was standing under a tree, looking up, completely still. He pointed up, and I nearly didn't believe my eyes. There, hanging from a branch about 30 feet off the ground, was a walking stick. The strap on the handle was looped around the branch, and it was just dangling there. The weirdest part, there was no way the man could have tossed it up that high, and there were no other signs of him being in the area. No tracks, no scent trail, nothing. We called out into the tree, but there was no answer. It didn't make any sense. We searched the area for hours, hoping to find something, anything to explain it, but we found nothing. Even the dogs couldn't pick up his scent after that tree. Eventually, the search had to be called off, and we moved on to other calls. But every day for months, the man's wife called, asking if we'd found her husband. Her voice just got more hopeless each time. I don't know why this case affected me so much, but it did. Maybe it was the sheer impossibility of it. How could his cane end up in that tree? Was someone playing some sick game with us? It felt like we were being taunted. It's a case we still talk about to this day. I just wish we had an answer. Some of the strangest missing persons cases I've worked on are the ones that never seem to make sense. Sometimes you find something in the woods that you just can't explain. And sometimes it feels like the forest is playing tricks on you. The disappearing boy and the cane in the tree. One of the cases that still haunts me involved an older man who went hiking alone, but never came home. His wife was worried about him because he had a history of seizures, and when we set out to search, it didn't take long before we found signs of him straying off the trail. We thought we were getting close, but when we arrived at the site, we saw something strange. A walking stick, dangling from a tree branch about 30 feet off the ground. The cane was tied to the branch, and there was no sign of the man anywhere nearby. There was no way he could have thrown it up there, and we couldn't find any tracks or clues. It was as if the cane was left as a clue, but by who? We searched for weeks, but eventually we had to call off the search. That's when we got a call from volunteers who had found a body 15 miles away from the original location. When we arrived, the body was that of the missing man. What shocked us all was that there was no way he could have climbed that treacherous slope. He was a grown man, and this slope was impossible even for us with climbing gear. Yet, there he was, untouched, not a scratch on him. The kid hadn't even looked like he had been there long, and we just couldn't explain how he got up there. The woman with the black-eyed man. Another case that sticks with me is when we were searching for a young woman who got separated from her hiking group. We searched through the night with our dogs and eventually found her curled up under a rotted log. She was in shock, but there were no visible injuries, and we managed to get her walking back to base camp. But along the way, things got strange. The woman kept looking behind us, and when we asked her what was wrong, she said there was a big man with black eyes following us. We couldn't see anyone, and at first we thought it was a symptom of shock. But the further we went, the more agitated she became. She started yelling at the trees, demanding this man leave her alone. When we were finally within sight of base camp, she turned to me with wide eyes and whispered that the man told me to speed up because he didn't like the scar on my neck. How could she have known about the tiny scar that was mostly hidden? Right after she said it, I heard a strange cough in my ear. Needless to say, I was glad when we finally made it to base, but that entire experience still doesn't sit right with me. The staircases in the woods. Now, this is the weirdest part of all. I don't know if this happens in every SAR unit, but it's something I've run into so often that it's almost become part of the job. When we go out into the deepest parts of the wilderness, 30 or 40 miles in, there's one thing I can almost guarantee we'll find: a staircase. It's just like a normal staircase, but it's in the middle of nowhere. Sometimes it's dilapidated, other times it looks like it's brand new, out of place. I've seen spiral staircases that look like they came from a lighthouse, and giant wooden staircases that lead nowhere. Every time I've asked someone about them, I get the same response: don't worry about it. I've been told repeatedly not to go near them or touch them. Yet, every time we go out on a search, I always seem to find one of these staircases. They can be anywhere, and they don't seem to lead to anything. The weirdest part? They're always just there. We've learned to ignore them, but the fact that they're in places they shouldn't be, I can't stop thinking about them. These stories are some of the most unsettling ones I've encountered as an SAR officer. From mysterious disappearances to unexplainable encounters deep in the woods, the things I've witnessed are enough to make anyone question what lurks out there. The tragic case of snow immersion suffocation. One of the most heartbreaking calls I ever responded to involved a young man who went missing during a heavy winter. It was one of those years where the snow just wouldn't stop, and it had piled up to nearly 6 feet in some areas. When we were called in, we knew the chances of finding him before spring were slim. But when the thaw came, a hiker reported a body near the main trail. We found the man's body at the base of a tree, surrounded by a pile of melted snow. He had gotten stuck in a tree well, a space formed when snow accumulates beneath the branches of a fir tree. It's an area of deep, loose snow, and if someone sits down in one of these areas, they can easily become trapped. The man was upside down, unable to free himself, and suffocated. It's called snow immersion suffocation, and it's something we see rarely, but it can happen in deep snow like we had this year. What haunted me the most was the thought of how long he must have struggled in the freezing cold, unable to breathe. The snow would have been so heavy and dense that he couldn't move. It's a terrifying thought, imagining those last moments. The meowing man in the woods. Another bizarre call I had involved an older woman who fainted while hiking with her husband. When we arrived, her husband was frantic, telling us that he had been just a little ways off when his wife started screaming. By the time he got back to her, she was unconscious. When we brought her back down the mountain, she came to, but she was still in shock. She explained to me that she had been waiting for her husband when she heard a strange noise. At first, she thought it was a cat, but as it came closer, she realized something was wrong. It wasn't a cat, she said. It was a man, saying meow, meow over and over, but it wasn't right. It sounded like a man's voice, but it was buzzing, almost like a broken hearing aid. She couldn't explain it further, and she fainted shortly after. We didn't think much of it at first, assuming it was just her mind playing tricks. But when I went back to search the area later, I started hearing something. At first it seemed faint, but it grew clearer. A man's voice, saying meow meow in a strange, monotone cadence. I couldn't pinpoint where it was coming from. It felt like it was all around me. I never found anything, and the sound eventually faded away. It was one of the strangest, most unsettling things I've ever experienced. The staircase in the middle of the wilderness. This is something that's just become part of the job. When we get called out to search deep in the woods, we inevitably find these staircases. They appear in all shapes and sizes, some new, some old, some dilapidated. But the strangest part is that they're always in the middle of nowhere. It's like someone cut a staircase out of a house and just dropped it in the forest. I've seen spiral metal staircases that look like they belonged in a lighthouse, and massive wooden staircases that just led to nowhere. They never seem to go anywhere, and yet, there they are. The oddest part is that no one seems to talk about it. When I first asked my superior about them, he just said, "Don't worry about it, it's normal." But the more I asked, the more I realized no one wants to talk about it. It's as though we're all just conditioned to ignore them. I've run into them on every search, and while I've been told to stay away from them, I can't help but wonder, why are they there? Suspenseful, unsolved cases and eerie encounters. I apologize for the long post earlier, but now I'm back with even more stories, some of which are from my friend who's been with the SAR team for a while. I know you've all been waiting for this, so here it goes. Mysterious stairs in the forest. As many of you have been asking about the stairs, I've got something to share that I think you'll find even stranger. We find these staircases in the middle of nowhere, deep in the forest, miles away from the nearest house or trail. Some are new, some old, and in some cases, they don't go anywhere at all. You can imagine what a mind-bending thing it is to stumble upon a staircase standing there in the middle of the wilderness with no house in sight. It doesn't make any sense. I've been told to ignore them, but something tells me that there's more going on with these stairs than anyone lets on. They don't belong there, yet there they are. Some of the most experienced officers have told me not to touch them, not to go near them, and to just carry on like they're part of the scenery. But it's hard to ignore the feeling that these things are somehow connected to the strange disappearances we get called out to. The woman and the man with black eyes. This story happened on one of those late-night searches, when everything feels off. We were looking for a young woman who had gotten separated from her group. It was already dark, and the dogs had picked up her scent, so we were pushing hard to find her. Eventually, we found her, curled up under a rotted log. She was in shock, no injuries, but missing her shoes and pack. We managed to get her to walk with us back to base, but as we walked, she kept looking behind us, asking why the big man with black eyes was following us. At first, we thought it was just shock, but as we got closer to base, she grew more agitated. She said the man kept making faces at her, and at one point she started yelling into the forest, begging him to leave her alone. When we were almost at base, she turned to me, wide-eyed, and said, "He says to tell you to speed up. He doesn't like looking at the scar on your neck." It sent a chill down my spine. There was no way she could have seen the scar, but she knew. Right after that, I heard the same strange coughing sound she described, right in my ear. It freaked me out, and I quickly hustled her to base. I'm not sure who or what we were running from, but something was definitely off about that night. The tragic case of a lost man. This is one of the strangest cases I've ever been a part of. We were called out to search for an older man who had gone missing while hiking on a well-marked trail. His wife was worried because he had a history of seizures and hadn't come back when he was supposed to. When we got to the scene, one of our veteran officers found signs that the man had gone off the trail, and we started following the path he'd taken. We were all spread out, trying to cover as much ground as possible when we were called back to one of our senior officers. He was standing at the base of a tree, his hands on his head, staring up at something. When I looked up, I couldn't believe what I saw. A walking stick was dangling from a branch about 30 feet up. No sign of the man, no other footprints around. It was strange because there was no way someone could toss a stick that high, and there was nothing else to indicate that anyone was there. We called out into the tree, but no answer. We never found him, and the strange image of that cane hanging from that branch still haunts me. How did it get up there? Strange encounters in the wild, lost souls, freak accidents, and unforgettable nightmares. A horrifying accident in the wilderness. This one still haunts me, and it's the hardest case I've ever worked on. It happened when I was still fresh out of training and trying to get the hang of things. We were called to the lake trail by a frantic husband whose wife was screaming in the background. When we arrived, we found him holding his wife, who was clutching something wrapped in her arms. Her screams weren't human. They sounded almost like animalistic shrieks. The husband kept begging for help, but when we asked what was wrong, he told us it wasn't his wife who needed help. It was what she was holding. The wife was in shock, rocking back and forth, clutching her baby in a sling. I approached her and, at first, didn't understand what I was seeing. The child was dead. His head had been caved in, his body scratched. I've seen my share of dead bodies, but this one hit me harder than I expected. We tried everything to get the woman to release the baby, but she just kept insisting he would be fine if we left her alone. Eventually, after what felt like hours, we got her to let go. The EMTs later confirmed that the baby had died instantly from the trauma. It turned out that the parents had been walking when the baby started fussing. The dad held him up while looking out over the gully, and the mother tripped and fell. She crashed into the dad, causing him to drop the child. The baby fell 20 feet onto the rocks below. The dad climbed down to retrieve him, but it was too late. It was a freak accident, a series of small misfortunes leading to an irreversible tragedy. It still shakes me to my core. Animal encounters, a moose chase. Now, not every story is terrifying. Some are more amusing. One of the most memorable calls I had was about a guy who had gotten chased up a tree by a massive male moose. These animals are huge, and they're known to be unpredictable, especially if you get between a mother moose and her calf. Luckily, this guy was up a tree, and we were able to get him down safely. But when he was finally back on solid ground, he looked at me and said, "God damn, them fuckers are big up close." It's one of those stories we all laugh about now, but at the time, I'm sure he wasn't thinking it was funny. The most terrifying thing I've ever experienced now. I've seen a lot of strange things over the years, but this one story is the one that almost made me rethink this whole job. I've been in the woods so much that you stop letting fear control you, until something happens that shakes you to your very core. This was the kind of experience that I can't shake, no matter how hard I try. It's hard to put into words, but I'll do my best to describe it. This particular incident took place deep in the woods, and I was out alone at the time. You'd think that after everything I've experienced, I'd be used to the isolation, but this one thing made me question everything. The details are a bit blurry now. Maybe my brain is protecting me from it, but whatever it was, it's the only thing that's made me seriously consider leaving the SAR team. It's not easy to talk about, but I'll try to explain the best I can. The search for a missing child turns into a nightmare. It was late spring when I got a call that seemed like any other. An all too familiar situation of a missing child. A 4-year-old girl had wandered away from her family's campsite, and after a couple of hours, her parents were frantic. I teamed up with one of my buddies, and we began the search in typical fashion. I won't lie, it's easy to become numb to the intensity of these situations after a while. Just another day on the job. You get used to the hours of searching, the quiet anxiety of not knowing, but you push through. We hiked through a small valley, chatting casually, but then something happened that froze us in place. We stopped, looked at each other, and it felt like the world shifted. My ears popped. I felt a strange, almost physical drop, like I had just fallen 10 feet in the air. Before I could ask my buddy if he'd felt it too, we heard a noise so deafening that it rattled my bones. Imagine a freight train, loud, furious, and coming from every direction at once, even from above. It felt like the forest was closing in on us, and I couldn't hear a thing over the roar. We screamed at each other, trying to make sense of it, but neither of us could see the source of the sound. It wasn't a landslide. There were no cliffs, no warning. Just pure, overwhelming noise. And then, just like that, it stopped. Silence. We stood there for a moment, dazed, listening to the woods return to normal. I got on the radio trying to find if anyone else had heard it, but no one else reported anything. We shrugged it off, unsure if we'd imagined it, but we kept moving. The crying that wasn't real. We didn't find the little girl by sunset, and as the night grew darker, the tension thickened. As an SR officer, you hate the thought of leaving a child alone in the woods overnight, especially with the darkness creeping in. The woods become a different place at night. Ominous, unsettling. It's an entirely different kind of fear when you know you're looking for a lost child in the dark. Around midnight, we were heading back to the rendezvous point when my buddy froze, shining his flashlight into a dense thicket of dead trees. I asked if he'd heard something, and he just motioned for silence. We listened. That's when we heard it. A faint cry. It wasn't the usual scared whimper of a lost child. It sounded strange, almost mechanical. We called out her name, but the crying continued, a loop. It was the same hitching sob, the same wail, the same soft hiccup repeated over and over. The same sequence, as though the sound had been recorded and was being played back. It was too perfect, too consistent. We both felt it, the dread creeping up our spines. Without saying a word, we bolted from the area, terrified. It was the first time I'd ever lost my composure on a job. A heartbreaking mystery. We never found the girl. The search continued for days, but there was no sign of her. No trace, no footprints, no evidence of where she could have gone. And that crying, the one that still haunts me, it was never explained. There was no one else in the woods, no one else who heard it. It was like the forest itself was toying with us. What happened to that little girl? Did she wander too far? Or was something else at work? No answers. We keep looking for people who disappear like her, and I have to wonder if we'll ever know the truth. Unexplained bodies found in the forest. What really happens to the missing? Not all missing persons cases end with a body, but sometimes finding a body raises even more unsettling questions. On my team, we've encountered some of the most perplexing, disturbing discoveries, cases where the truth remains as elusive as the missing people we're searching for. These bodies, forever etched in our memories, have left us questioning the very nature of these disappearances. The teenage boy. A year after he disappeared, we recovered the remains of a teenage boy, just his skull, 2 finger bones, and his camera. The camera had been crushed, but the oddest part? It was found nearly 40 miles from where he'd last been seen. The elderly man. A month after he vanished, we found nothing but his pelvis. No explanation, no trace of where the rest of him had gone. The toddler's remains. A 2-year-old's lower jaw and right foot were discovered on a high ridge peak, miles away from where he'd been playing. The little girl with Down syndrome. A 10-year-old girl's body was found nearly 20 miles from where she'd gone missing. She had died of exposure, but the autopsy revealed something even stranger. Her stomach contained berries and cooked meat. It looked as though someone had been feeding her. But there were no suspects. The baby found in a tree. A 1-year-old's frozen body was found a week after he disappeared, hidden inside the hollow trunk of a tree, 10 miles from the last place he was seen. The strangest part? His tongue was missing. The missing girl's remains. We found a single vertebra and right kneecap of a 3-year-old buried in the snow almost 20 miles from her family's campground. A strange encounter with the stairs. But the most unnerving part of my job isn't just the bodies we find, it's the strange occurrences that go beyond reason. One of my fellow SAR officers had a chilling encounter that still keeps him up at night. It's about the stairs. You've probably heard about them before. Stairs that appear in the middle of nowhere, in the wilderness, as if they belong in a house but were plucked out of thin air and dropped into the woods. These stairs have haunted us for years, and here's one of the most unsettling stories. My buddy had been an officer for about 7 years when he first came across them. It was on a search for a missing teenage girl. He was on his own, lagging behind the main group, when he saw them. Stairs, standing alone in the forest, about 10 miles from the trail. The stairs looked pristine, with soft white carpeting and no sign of dirt, leaves, or wildlife in the area. There was something unsettlingly perfect about them. He thought he was just being paranoid, but the longer he stood there, the more the atmosphere seemed to shift. The air grew heavy. It felt like he was doing something terribly wrong, like stepping into a forbidden room. Curious, he reached out and touched the stairs. The moment his hand made contact, a strange, sticky sensation from the new carpet made his skin crawl. But nothing happened. He felt no physical discomfort or strange force. His mind was racing, but still, he climbed the stairs. When he reached the top, a growing dread swept over him. The world around him went silent. He couldn't hear the wind or his own breathing, just a deep, all-encompassing quiet. It felt like he was suspended in time, as if the forest had been swallowed up. The isolation was suffocating, and his senses were overwhelmed. He quickly descended and rejoined the search team, but the eerie feeling lingered. He never spoke of it. He couldn't explain it, and he didn't want to acknowledge it. But from that day forward, he avoided those stairs. A strange encounter with stairs in the wilderness. So my friend has been working as an SR officer for years, and he's encountered his fair share of bizarre situations. But the strangest part of his job didn't happen out in the field. It happened after his encounter with the infamous stairs. You know those rumors about stairs that appear in the middle of the woods? People always say that they don't belong, like they're pieces of someone's house that were dropped into the forest for no reason. Well, my buddy got curious about them, against the advice of his trainer. One day, after a long search for a missing teenage girl, he broke away from the group and found a set of stairs, pristine and white, sitting quietly in the woods. No dirt, no dust, nothing out of the ordinary. Just stairs, like something from a house, right in the middle of the wilderness. He figured it was strange, but didn't feel anything major was going to happen, so he decided to climb them. It was exactly what you'd expect. Nothing happened at first. He didn't feel sick or hear strange noises. But as soon as he reached the top, an overwhelming, wrong feeling took over him. It was like he was doing something illegal, something he wasn't supposed to be doing. The forest went eerily silent. He couldn't even hear his own breath. It was as if time had stopped around him. Terrified, he quickly descended the stairs, rejoined the search team, and kept his experience to himself. But when he returned to the base, he was confronted by his trainer, an experienced officer who had seen more than his fair share of strange things. The trainer's anger was palpable. He asked him, "You went up them, didn't you?" And my buddy, shocked, admitted it. The trainer, with a dead look in his eyes, told him, "Never go near those stairs again. If I ever catch you on them, you're fired. Understood?" To this day, my buddy can't stop thinking about what happened that day and why his trainer reacted that way. But here's the most unsettling part. After my friend climbed those stairs, the scent trail they were following, one they'd been tracking for hours, disappeared completely. The dogs couldn't pick up anything. It was like the girl they were searching for had vanished from existence. A lost child found in the snow, the mystery that haunts. There's something about missing children that haunts every SAR officer. You never forget those cases where the kids just vanish. My friend was part of the search for a severely disabled 5-year-old boy who went missing during a fall picnic. His parents were convinced someone had taken him. The kid couldn't walk far on his own. There was no way he could have disappeared on his own, they insisted. They searched for weeks, covering miles, but the dogs never picked up the boy's scent. No sign of him anywhere. The parents were devastated, and the case turned cold. My buddy thought it was over. Then, months later, on a training operation, he found something strange. At the top of a mountain buried in the snow, he spotted a shirt, recognizable, distinctive. As he approached, he found the boy's body frozen solid. But here's the real kicker. This kid had been missing for almost 3 months. He couldn't have walked that far. The terrain was treacherous, and there was no way the child could have made it up to this peak. But there he was, dead from exposure. What really rattled my buddy was what the boy was holding, a large chunk of ice, crudely carved into the shape of a person. He was clutching it tightly, and it had frostbitten his chest and hands. It was a chilling sight, and the worst part, there was nothing in his stomach. No food, no water. It was like the kid had vanished from reality itself, only to be placed there, frozen and alone to die in the snow. The man who vanished into thin air. Before I wrap up, I want to share one last story from my buddy. This one happened just a few months ago. It's still fresh in his mind, and he can't stop thinking about it. He was called out to search for a missing person, an elderly man who had wandered off the trail. It was supposed to be a straightforward search, but things took a strange turn. They found the man's body after a couple of days. It was located about 50 miles from where he had last been seen. But the weird part? The body wasn't where it was supposed to be. No one could explain how he got there. There were no signs of a struggle or any clues to suggest that he had moved on his own. It was as if he had just appeared in the middle of nowhere. The team tried to find any logical explanation for his disappearance. But after months of searching, the case remained unresolved. The man had vanished without a trace, only to appear in a place that made no sense, with no clues as to how he got there. The mountain lion's scream that led to something worse. One of the most unsettling experiences my buddy had as an SAR officer happened during a routine reconnaissance for mountain lions. There had been reports of sightings in the area, so his team was tasked with checking out the heavily forested parts of the park to determine whether the lions were around. As he was making his way through the woods near dusk, he heard it. A scream. At first it sounded like a woman in distress, horribly shrill and terrifying. Now, anyone familiar with the wilderness knows that mountain lions have a terrifying scream that sounds almost exactly like a woman being brutally murdered. It's something you don't forget once you hear it. My buddy radioed in to let the team know about the sound and continued his search, figuring it was just a mountain lion. But then it happened again, and again, always from the same spot. The screams grew closer. He was about to head back when suddenly, the scream came from just a few yards away. The hairs on his neck stood up as he realized the mountain lion was much closer than he thought. He began to hurry back, trying not to panic. But then, it followed him. The scream echoed from behind as he started to run, his heart racing. He didn't want to get caught off guard by a mountain lion in the twilight. But just as he thought he was getting away, the scream stopped. He turned around, half expecting to see the lion. Instead, he saw something far worse. Just ahead, near a bend in the path, stood a figure. My buddy called out to it, thinking it was a fellow officer, telling them that the trails were closed due to the mountain lion. But the figure didn't respond. As my buddy got closer, the figure suddenly took an impossibly long step toward him, and then, to his horror, let out the same blood-curdling scream. Without hesitation, he turned and sprinted back to base ops, never once looking behind him. By the time he got back, the scream had disappeared into the woods. He didn't mention it to anyone, only saying there was a mountain lion in the area and the trails needed to be closed. But to this day, he knows deep down that what he encountered that evening was far more sinister than just an animal. The rookie's first encounter with the wilderness. After my buddy returned from his training operation, he told me about an incident with a rookie that perfectly summed up what it's like to experience the unknown in the wild. The rookie was on his first high-elevation mountain rescue, and things weren't going as planned. When you're out there in the wilderness, especially in higher elevations, you're taught to always expect the unexpected. You prepare for accidents, injuries, and everything in between. But this rookie had something even stranger happen to him during a routine operation. KD, a veteran SAR officer with over 15 years of experience and a special focus on high-elevation rescues, told me about the rookie's experience. She was guiding him through one of their exercises when they stumbled upon something odd, something that neither of them could quite explain. I'll be getting into more of KD's stories in the next part, but this one truly stuck with me. It shows how, no matter how much training you have, there's always something in the wilderness that will make you question everything. The frozen child in the snow. One of the most heart-wrenching stories I've ever heard comes from KD, a seasoned SAR officer who has been working in high-altitude mountain rescues for years. She recounted a case that still haunts her, a case that involved a little boy who tragically froze to death in a storm. The weather that year had been brutal, and the park where KD worked had seen a series of disappearances, some of which ended in death. One particular case stood out. A family had been snowshoeing, and despite warnings about dangerous areas, the father took them into a spot that wasn't safe. The snow gave way beneath them, and they fell over 200 feet. The parents died instantly, while the two kids survived. But one child, a little boy, tried to leave his injured sibling behind and search for help. Unfortunately, a storm overtook him. KD was the one who found his frozen body. She described how, when she found the boy, he was sitting upright in the snow, his knees tucked to his chest. His face was frozen in a twisted expression of fear. He had died crying. She said it was painfully obvious that in his last moments, the boy had been terrified as he succumbed to hypothermia. As a mother, KD told me, it broke her heart. She can't stop thinking about the father who led them into such a dangerous situation. I hope he's burning in hell as we speak, she said. The disemboweled climber. The second traumatic story KD shared happened when she was a rookie. They were searching for a missing climber, a man who had failed to return after his climb the previous day. His wife was desperate, convinced something had gone horribly wrong. KD and her team made their way up a treacherous part of the mountain, and it wasn't long before they came across a gruesome sight. Blood, so much blood, spilled across the snow, leading them to a body. The climber had been partially disemboweled. KD described the scene in chilling detail. The man had been using his ice axe, but had likely hit a loose patch of ice and fallen. In the fall, the ice axe had impaled him, and as he tried to crawl to safety, he had torn himself apart. He died slowly, bleeding out beneath the cliff face. The physical toll of what had happened was hard to ignore. Even the veterans who had seen it all had trouble dealing with the body. KD herself wasn't fazed by gore, but the sight of the climber's intestines spilling out when they turned him over was something no one could forget. The mysterious disappearance of two little boys. KD's most chilling story, however, involved the strange disappearances of two young children. A family had been berry picking near the park entrance when their youngest, a little boy under 5, vanished without a trace. Despite an extensive search that lasted for months, there was no sign of him. The dogs couldn't pick up his scent, and it was as if he had simply vanished from existence. But the real nightmare began 6 months later. The family returned to the site of the first disappearance to place flowers at a memorial. They were grieving the loss of their first child when, in the blink of an eye, their other son, his older brother, vanished. This time, the search was massive, one of the largest in state history. Hundreds of volunteers combed the area, retracing every step, but they never found a trace of the child. It was as though he had disappeared into thin air. No scent, no sign, no clue. This case, like many others in the wilderness, remains unsolved. Some believe it was the work of something far more sinister, something that takes children and never lets them go. The disappearance of the little boy, the fuzzy man. One of the most unsettling cases KD ever worked on involved the disappearance of a young boy who vanished for 2 weeks under strange circumstances. A 4-year-old boy had wandered off from his family's campsite, and despite an extensive search, no trace of him could be found for nearly 2 weeks. But then, almost 15 miles from where he had gone missing, a volunteer found the boy, alive, well, and uninjured. But there was something strange about him. The child wasn't dirty or traumatized, and when asked about his ordeal, he mentioned being taken by the fuzzy man. KD was intrigued and asked the boy to describe the man. The child said the man wasn't hairy, but was blurry, like looking at something through half-closed eyes. According to the boy, the fuzzy man had taken him deep into the woods and kept him in a hollow tree, where he was given berries to eat. The boy mentioned that the fuzzy man wasn't scary, but something about him disturbed the child. The fuzzy man didn't have any eyes. KD asked the boy more questions, but his answers were strange and cryptic. He said the fuzzy man would get mad and yell when he tried to leave the clearing, but he didn't have a mouth. The boy even claimed that the fuzzy man had told him he wasn't the right kind, but refused to explain further. Despite these strange statements, no one could find any clues about where the boy had been for the past 2 weeks or what had truly happened. The boy's brother, who had vanished at the same time, was never found. The disorienting experience in the snow. KD shared another story that still gives her chills. It happened when she was a rookie, learning the basics of high-altitude climbing. She had ventured off a little way from her training group to relieve herself, but when she turned back, she realized something was horribly wrong. She had no idea where she was. This wasn't just a simple case of being lost. Katie felt a sense of amnesia, as if her mind had erased everything about her surroundings. She couldn't even remember what state she was in. Panic began to set in as she walked aimlessly, unsure of how to get back. Then, things got even stranger. She started hearing a voice, almost like a croaky inside her head, urging her to find something to eat. It was relentless, telling her she needed to find food or else she wouldn't be okay. At first, she brushed it off, but the voice grew louder and more insistent. Katie found herself walking aimlessly, desperately searching for something to eat, even though she wasn't sure how long she'd been out there. The hunger felt endless, and she would have eaten anything. That's when she spotted a fellow SAR officer coming toward her. He looked terrified. As he approached, Katie realized she was reaching for her hunting knife without even thinking. The voice in her head, the overwhelming hunger, made her feel like eating was the only thing that mattered. The officer saw her movements and immediately backed off, fearing for his safety. KD was later able to regain her senses and return to safety, but the experience left her shaken. It was a terrifying reminder of just how easy it is for the mind to unravel when alone in the wilderness. The unsolvable mystery of Joey's disappearance. One of the most chilling stories EW shared with me involved an 11-year-old boy named Joey, who went missing near a river. At first, the search team assumed he had drowned, but when they brought in dogs, they led them away from the river and into dense forest. What followed was a series of strange and unexplainable events. As the dogs worked, they picked up Joey's scent in a very peculiar pattern, as if he was moving from one random spot to another, like hopping between squares on a checkerboard. This didn't make sense at all. How could the boy be moving in and out of areas without leaving a trace in between? Then, EW and his partner stumbled upon a set of stairs deep in the forest. But when EW approached them, his partner refused to come near. He had been told to never approach the stairs, and there was a clear, unspoken rule among SAR officers to avoid them. Still, EW couldn't resist, and when he went to check, he found something horrifying. At the bottom of the stairs, curled up on the step, was Joey. Dead. His small body was curled in pain, with his face twisted in terror and frozen tears still on his cheeks. There was no obvious cause of death. The kid had only been missing for a few hours, so how could he end up dead without a scratch? EW was left with no answers, just a heartbroken family and a case that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The disappearance of the fuzzy man. This next story comes from KD, another SAR officer with a wealth of unsettling experiences in the wild. She told me about a case that involved the disappearance of a little boy from a park. The child vanished without a trace, and the dogs couldn't track his scent at all. But 2 months later, the boy was found, alive, well, and uninjured, but something was off. The child didn't seem scared. He looked clean, calm, and completely fine, even though he had been missing for weeks. But when asked about his time away, the boy told a chilling story. He described being taken by the fuzzy man. KD was intrigued. Was it Bigfoot? But the boy described the man as fuzzy, not hairy, like a blurry figure. as if viewed through half-closed eyes. The boy told KD how the fuzzy man had fed him berries and allowed him to sleep in a hollow tree. But the most disturbing part of the story? The fuzzy man had no eyes. The boy was calm and nonchalant about his experiences, but he explained that the fuzzy man had kept him safe until it was time to release him. He said the fuzzy man was going to keep him, but the boy wasn't the right kind. KD was left with more questions than answers, and no one ever found out what really happened to the boy's brother, who disappeared at the same time. The creepy stairs and the frozen child. EW shared another haunting story about a mysterious set of stairs he encountered during a search. He and his team were looking for a young boy who had gone missing near a river. When the dogs picked up his scent, they followed it into a dense forest, but the trail became bizarre. The dogs picked up Joey's scent in random patches, but never where the scent should logically connect. It was almost like Joey was teleporting from one place to another. After discovering a set of stairs in the woods, EW approached them alone, despite his partner's refusal to go near them. He didn't feel anything unusual at first, but when he found the boy's body, something felt off. The boy was curled up on the bottom step, seemingly in pain but without any obvious injuries. There was no sign of blood or trauma, yet the boy had clearly died from something. The cause of death remained a mystery, and the whole situation had an eerie, otherworldly feel to it. EW couldn't shake the fact that the stairs seemed to be tied to some inexplicable force. The fuzzy voice and the knife incident. KD's own experience with the strange and unsettling wilderness occurred when she found herself separated from her group during a training session. What started as a simple walk to relieve herself turned into a nightmarish experience. She suddenly found herself completely disoriented, with no idea where she was or how she had gotten there. But it wasn't just the confusion. KD heard a voice inside her head, low and croaky, telling her she needed to eat, that she had to find something to eat or she wouldn't survive. The hunger she felt was consuming, and it drove her to keep moving, desperately searching for something to consume. When a fellow SAR officer found her, KD was reaching for her hunting knife. The officer could see that she was in distress, but KD didn't realize what she was doing. She was overwhelmed by the need to eat, and it was almost like something was controlling her actions. After the officer got her back to safety, they learned that she had been gone for 2 days. The feeling of disorientation, the hunger, and the strange internal voice were all symptoms of a strange mental state. But no one could figure out what had caused it. The haunted stairs, a deadly mystery in the woods. PB, a seasoned SAR officer, shared one of the most chilling stories I've heard during a grid sweep training exercise. He told me about the infamous stairs in the forest, an inexplicable phenomenon that has haunted SAR teams for decades. He explained that these stairs have always been a part of the park, appearing in random, isolated spots. Some people report nothing happening when they approach them, but others aren't so lucky. PB recounted a particularly disturbing incident when a man lost his hand. He touched a tree branch after stepping onto the stairs, and in an instant, his hand was severed clean off. No blood, no wound, just gone. Another time, a woman's brain hemorrhaged after simply touching one of the stairs. She collapsed before anyone could help, and the last thing PB remembers is the blood leaking into her eye. Despite the warnings to avoid the stairs, people still approach them, and each time something bad happens. Whether it's someone going missing or a freak accident, the stairs seem to be the catalyst for disasters. What makes it worse is that the stairs never appear in the same place twice. No one can explain why or how they get there. But PB has learned one thing for sure: stay away from them. The Goat Man and the disappearance of the Fuzzy Man. In a more personal encounter, PB shared the story of a rookie SAR officer who became obsessed with the Goat Man, a cryptid that supposedly haunts the forests. This rookie's fixation on the Goat Man got under PB's skin, so much so that he told him to shut up and walk. As they continued their search, they came across a set of stairs, which stopped the rookie dead in his tracks. When PB explained the dangers associated with them, the rookie was eager to know more. PB warned him about the stairs, saying they were connected to a lot of unexplained disappearances and deaths in the park. But that wasn't the end of the mystery. When PB later relayed his story to the rookie, he shared something much darker, something he wasn't supposed to. He told me that the Forest Service had known about these dangerous anomalies for years and had even forced employees to sign confidentiality agreements. One particular case stood out. A missing boy who, after being found, claimed he had been kept by the Fuzzy Man. PB explained that the boy described the Fuzzy Man as a blurry figure who took care of him, feeding him berries and letting him sleep in a hollow tree. The boy's only complaint? The Fuzzy Man had no eyes. After the boy was found, the search for his missing brother continued, but there was no trace of him. The more PB told me, the more I understood the truth behind the sinister things happening out there. Things that seemed to vanish and reappear, and the dangers that seemed to follow the unknown. The kid who vanished into thin air, EW, a former trainer, also shared a chilling tale involving a boy who disappeared and reappeared under strange circumstances. EW and his team were searching for an 11-year-old boy named Joey, who went missing near a river. At first, they suspected he had fallen in and drowned, but the scent trail led them away from the water and deeper into the woods. As they continued their search, the scent pattern became bizarre. The dogs picked up the boy's scent in random patches, but not consistently across the grid. EW and his partner stumbled upon a set of stairs, which had a strange pull on him. When EW approached, he found the body of the missing boy, but there was no sign of injury. He was curled up in pain on the bottom step, with no apparent trauma or cause of death. After the coroner's report, EW learned that Joey's organs had been mysteriously punctured, like a clean hole punch through his insides, with no explanation. Even the kid's parents couldn't understand how he could have died, considering he had been missing for only a few hours. This case still haunts EW, and he admits he's never been able to shake the feeling that there's something else out there, something far worse than anyone knows. The disorienting wilderness and the fading memory. KD also shared her experience of becoming completely disoriented during a routine training exercise. Separated from her group while on a break, she suddenly found herself unable to recognize anything around her. She felt a sense of total amnesia, not knowing where she was or how she got there. As she wandered in the snow, a strange voice began speaking to her, urging her to eat. It was a voice that sounded almost like it came from inside her own head, and the hunger she felt was overwhelming. When one of her colleagues found her, she was dangerously close to using a hunting knife on herself in a frenzy to satisfy the hunger. The terrifying thing was that, in that fugue state, she didn't recognize her own actions. It wasn't until he stopped her that KD came to her senses. But when she was taken back to base, she learned she had been gone for 2 days, even though she felt like no time had passed at all. The horrific discovery in the giant tree. I have one of the most disturbing stories to share, and it involves something that still haunts me to this day. I was partnered with a firefighter during a training operation, and we were assigned to help with a call that seemed like just another routine rescue. The reports were that a young child had gotten stuck in a massive tree, and they needed help because the SAR team didn't feel safe attempting the climb. At first, I thought it was just another absurd rescue call. How could a kid get stuck in a tree that was too big for professionals? But when we arrived and saw the tree, I started to understand why they needed help. The thing was huge, with a thick base that tapered off as it reached skyward. But the strangest part? The kid was nowhere near where he should have been. As I started to climb, I kept telling myself that it was just some prank or a weird accident. But the higher I went, the more something didn't feel right. The tree was massive, and I thought it might collapse under my weight as I reached higher and higher. Then, when I was just about to the top, I saw it, a flash of blue. The kid's shirt tangled in the branches. I called to him, asking him to come closer, but he didn't respond. I moved in closer, already knowing that he wasn't going to answer. When I reached him, I found the body of the kid cradled in a fork of the tree. His intestines were hanging out of his mouth, twisted grotesquely around the branches. And that wasn't all. His eyes were gone, as if some horrific force had sucked them out. His guts were even hanging out of his pants, a sickening, unnatural display. I'll never forget the smell. The body was bloated and swollen, like it had been floating in water for days. Flies were crawling all over it, and I felt myself freeze, unable to process what I was seeing. I don't even know why, but in that moment, I grabbed a stick, broke it off from a branch, and pushed the kid's body down, letting it fall to the ground. The thought of carrying him down? I couldn't do it. When I reached the bottom, I wanted to scream at the captain. How could they send me up there, knowing the kid was already dead? But all he said was, "Thank you for getting the evidence down." The word evidence. Not even a person. The whole thing felt wrong. The weird, vacuum-like injury. The captain and a few others stayed behind while I was escorted out. I asked one of the men what he thought happened to the kid. He looked at me, his face serious, and said something that still makes my blood run cold. I would have said a crush injury. He told me, based on the way his intestines came out, but with crush injuries, there's usually trauma, massive contusions under the skin. This wasn't like that. It was almost as if something sucked his guts out, like a vacuum. But there was no trauma. None at all. I still can't make sense of it. What kind of force could do that? What could pull a child's insides out like that and leave no signs of physical injury? The whole thing left me with more questions than answers. I'll never forget the way the captain reacted when I asked him about it. He just said, "It's none of your concern," and moved on. The way he said it, like the child wasn't even real, just a case, just evidence. It felt wrong. It felt unnatural. The upside-down stairs. So I've been meaning to share this story, but it's taken me a while to process everything. I was talking with one of the senior vets during a training exercise. We were walking together, sharing stories, when he brought up something really strange that I'd never heard of before. Flipped stairs. At first, I thought he was joking. I mean, we all know about the normal creepy stairs that show up in the middle of the woods, right? But these were different. He described them as flipped, like someone had taken a dollhouse staircase, flipped it upside down, and stuck it in the dirt. He said he'd only come across them a few times, but each time they bothered him more than the normal stairs. He couldn't have walked that far. The terrain was treacherous, and there was no way the child could have made it up to this peak. But there he was, dead from exposure. What really rattled my buddy was what the boy was holding, a large chunk of ice, crudely carved into the shape of a person. He was clutching it tightly, and it had frostbitten his chest and hands. It was a chilling sight, and the worst part, there was nothing in his stomach. No food, no water. It was like the kid had vanished from reality itself, only to be placed there, frozen and alone to die in the snow. The man who vanished into thin air. Before I wrap up, I want to share one last story from my buddy. This one happened just a few months ago. It's still fresh in his mind, and he can't stop thinking about it. He was called out to search for a missing person, an elderly man who had wandered off the trail. It was supposed to be a straightforward search, but things took a strange turn. They found the man's body after a couple of days. It was located about 50 miles from where he had last been seen. But the weird part? The body wasn't where it was supposed to be. No one could explain how he got there. There were no signs of a struggle or any clues to suggest that he had moved on his own. It was as if he had just appeared in the middle of nowhere. The team tried to find any logical explanation for his disappearance. But after months of searching, the case remained unresolved. The man had vanished without a trace, only to appear in a place that made no sense, with no clues as to how he got there. The mountain lion's scream that led to something worse. One of the most unsettling experiences my buddy had as an SAR officer happened during a routine reconnaissance for mountain lions. There had been reports of sightings in the area, so his team was tasked with checking out the heavily forested parts of the park to determine whether the lions were around. As he was making his way through the woods near dusk, he heard it. A scream. At first it sounded like a woman in distress, horribly shrill and terrifying. Now, anyone familiar with the wilderness knows that mountain lions have a terrifying scream that sounds almost exactly like a woman being brutally murdered. It's something you don't forget once you hear it. My buddy radioed in to let the team know about the sound and continued his search, figuring it was just a mountain lion. But then it happened again, and again, always from the same spot. The screams grew closer. He was about to head back when suddenly, the scream came from just a few yards away. The hairs on his neck stood up as he realized the mountain lion was much closer than he thought. He began to hurry back, trying not to panic. But then, it followed him. The scream echoed from behind as he started to run, his heart racing. He didn't want to get caught off guard by a mountain lion in the twilight. Final thoughts. This vet, like all of us, was used to strange things happening out in the woods, but after what he saw, he couldn't stop thinking about it. The upside-down stairs, the faceless man, they both felt wrong, unnatural. But sometimes, out here in the wilderness, things don't always add up. Sometimes there's no explanation for what you see, and maybe that's what's most terrifying of all. The strange encounter in the woods. The fuzzy man. We were sitting around a campfire one night, just swapping ghost stories. It's a bit of a tradition, and most of the time, it's all in good fun, especially when the rookies get spooked. But there was one story that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, and I know it had the same effect on a few others around the fire. A woman, one of the more experienced SAR officers, shared a memory from her childhood. She grew up in northern Maine, where the forest is so thick and isolated that the sun barely makes it through the canopy. The kind of forest where everything seems alive with secrets and everyone knows there are places you just don't go. As a kid, she and a friend would often wander the woods behind her house, always keeping to a certain boundary. There was an unspoken rule in her community: never wander too far. No one explained why, but everyone knew not to stray beyond a certain point. As kids do, they made up wild stories to explain the boundaries, stories of giant bears, hidden creatures, and the darker, older secrets of the forest. But one summer, after a series of massive storms, something changed. A portion of the forest behind her house caught fire. After it was extinguished, something strange happened to the firefighters who came back. They weren't the same. She described them as having a shell-shocked look, like soldiers returning from war, too shaken to speak and too broken to smile. The locals called them walking dead, and the woman's childhood self couldn't understand it, but she knew it was something serious. So one day, she and her friend decided to defy their parents and venture into the burned forest, to see for themselves what had changed. They didn't expect what they would find. As they ventured further into the charred woods, the landscape turned alien, like something out of a post-apocalyptic world. The trees were gone, and all that remained were blackened, twisted remains. They stumbled upon the skeleton of a deer, its antlers broken in unnatural ways, which unsettled her friend deeply. The bones seemed wrong, but the real horror came when they started hearing someone shout for help from the distance. Thinking it was someone in trouble, they rushed toward the sound. But when the man they found got closer, the woman realized something was terribly wrong. His face was horribly disfigured. His lips, nose, and forehead were gone, as though they'd been sliced off. He was bleeding profusely, and his clothing was completely out of place, old-fashioned, almost military style, with strange buttons and red trim. The man's behavior was even more disturbing. He grabbed her shoulders, babbling about his unit and asking how long he'd been gone. His screams echoed in the forest, and as she tried to help him, he became hysterical, shouting that she shouldn't touch him because she might send him back there. Then, in an instant, he ran off into the woods, his screams fading into the night. They never spoke about what happened to the man, and after that day, the woman swore off the woods, unable to explain what she had witnessed. She never talked about it again. Not to her friend. Not to anyone. The unsolved deaths, the drowned woman, and the mystery man. This next story, one that my friend told me, really stuck with me for a long time. When you're a SAR officer, you're used to seeing things that make you question the natural order of the world. But nothing prepared me for these unexplained deaths. There was a call about an elderly man found dead in the woods. He'd been hiking on a well-known trail, and by all appearances, it looked like he had fallen and struck his head on a rock. But here's the thing. There was no trail of blood, no sign of the injury. In fact, the area where he fell had no large rocks at all. It was an odd place for a head injury to occur, and despite the severity of his injury, no one heard anything unusual. No one saw anything. He was just there. And then there was the woman I'll never forget. This one happened a few years ago in the high desert. A woman was found dead, curled around a large juniper tree. When we found her, there was something off about her body. Her clothes were dry, her hair wasn't wet, but her lungs and stomach were filled with water. In the middle of the desert, no water anywhere, no bodies of water for miles around. How could she have drowned? It didn't make sense. The coroner couldn't figure it out either. The report stated that she had drowned, but where did the water come from? And how was it possible that she was completely dry, save for the water inside her? No explanation. Final thoughts. These stories remind me of how much we don't understand. The strange happenings out in the wilderness, missing people, inexplicable deaths, unexplainable phenomena, it all ties together. And no matter how much we want to write it off as coincidence, there's something about these woods that feels wrong. Maybe it's the stairs, maybe it's the faceless men, maybe it's just a deep, primal sense that something out there doesn't want to be found. I'll be back with more soon. And for those of you asking about the stairs, just wait until you hear the next story. You won't believe it. The cold, whispering voice. I'll never forget a certain call I went on early in my career. It was a case that still haunts me to this day. A young man with Down syndrome had gone missing after his family lost sight of him on a popular trail. It was out of character for him, as he had never wandered off before. His mother was frantic, and understandably so. But as we began the search, we realized this wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't until the next day that we found him. And even then, it was bittersweet. We found him deep in a canyon, barely alive, his spine broken, both legs shattered. His injuries were severe, and it was clear he'd been alone for far too long, trying to drag himself through the rough terrain. As we brought him back up, I sat with him in the helicopter. I tried to comfort him, knowing full well that his chances were slim. He wasn't aware of much except the deep cold that had seeped into his bones. He kept crying, muttering, "It was cold out there. My legs were frozen. It's cold in me." It was heartbreaking to hear. When I asked him why he had wandered, he spoke about a little sad boy who wanted him to come play. He said the boy wanted to trade so he could go home. I tried to keep him calm, holding his hand as his breaths grew shallow. But moments before we landed, he looked at me, tears rolling down his face, and said the words that will never leave me. "Mama won't see me no more. Love Mama, wish she was here." And then, just like that, he was gone. It still rattles me to this day. The severed hand inside the tree, something's wrong in the woods. Not long after this, I spoke to one of the senior rangers about the case, seeking solace. But he shared a story of his own that disturbed me even more. It was a strange case from several years ago that never made the news for reasons that still puzzle me. A part of the park had been sold to a logging company. It was controversial, but the decision was made due to financial pressures after the recession. The loggers were clearing out a plot of land when something truly bizarre happened. The crew had just felled a large tree, and when they cut into it, they uncovered something completely unexpected. A human hand, perfectly severed, wedged inside the tree's trunk. The hand appeared to be fused to the wood, fresh, as if it had only been placed there a day ago. The loggers were adamant that they hadn't planted it there. When the rangers arrived, they were met with the sight of the hand, still stuck in the tree, looking entirely out of place. It wasn't mummified, it wasn't old, it was new, with no signs of decay. The police were called, and after a brief investigation, they couldn't explain how the hand had gotten there. It was as though it had been placed there, yet no one could figure out by whom or how. The whole situation felt off. The hand was part of the tree, as if it had been there for years, but it was only hours old. The cops confiscated the hand and closed off the area. There were rumors of a larger investigation, but nothing ever came of it. It's now one of the park's darkest legends, an unsolved mystery that refuses to be explained. Final thoughts. Something's watching. The strangest part of this whole thing is the feeling that comes with being out there in the woods. The feeling that something is always watching you. The hand in the tree is just one example, but there's a pattern that runs through the stories. Something isn't right in those woods. Whether it's the things that happen to people, the mysterious disappearances, or the unsettling events that occur, there's a darkness that's hard to ignore. And even though I've been doing this for years, I still can't shake the feeling that we don't really know what's out there. There are things in those woods that refuse to be explained. I'll be back with more stories soon. In the meantime, stay safe out there, and remember, some things are better left unexplained. Backflipping man in the woods. Sometimes, out in the woods, things happen that defy explanation. There's one story that still makes my skin crawl, and it's a true one. A friend of mine, a seasoned SAR officer, told me about a call he went on to investigate strange noises near a camping site. Campers had reported hearing screaming at night, and of course, the first thing they thought of was a mountain lion. Now, he's not a fan of mountain lions. He's dealt with them a lot over the years, and they're a pain. So he and his partner set off to investigate, walking through the woods, hoping to track down the animal. They find some signs. Broken branches, potential dens, but nothing conclusive. His partner wandered off to take a piss, and that's when things got strange. He stayed behind, watching a burrow under a tree, when he suddenly hears cracking branches. Thinking it was the mountain lion, he pulls out his gun, ready to defend himself. But as he looks, what he sees next made his blood run cold. A man, backflipping through the woods. Yeah, you heard that right, backflipping. This guy was flipping over logs and brush, not walking, but literally doing backflips like he had springs in his legs. The officer yelled for him to stop, but the man kept coming, flipping closer and closer. Panicking, he fired a warning shot in front of the man. The guy didn't flinch. Instead, he flipped away into the woods, vanishing into the trees as if he had never been there. His partner came running back, asking what had happened. My friend explained, but in the end, they were left with no answers, just the unsettling feeling of having been stalked by someone who shouldn't have been able to move that way. A boy, a fused hand, and the woods of Central Oregon. Not long after this, another SAR officer I spoke to shared a story that stuck with me. We were talking about strange things that happen in the woods, and I mentioned hearing about legends like the Wendigo, the Rake, and other cryptids. But he didn't share a theory, he shared an experience. He told me about a camping trip he had in Central Oregon, where he'd met a boy named Nolan. They'd spent several summers camping near the Warm Springs Reservation, and one year, they went out near a river to try night fishing. They set up their camp about a third of a mile away from their main camp, deep into the woods where it was quiet, dark, and isolated. As the night settled in, Nolan did something the storyteller had never seen before. He used flint to start a fire, something that left the narrator in awe. But what happened next was far from awe-inspiring. As they sat by the fire, chatting away like 12-year-olds do, Nolan suddenly pointed over the narrator's shoulder at the river and asked, "Do you see that?" The narrator turned, but whatever Nolan had seen was gone. But that wasn't the end of it. Nolan insisted they'd been watched the whole night, and by the end of the trip, something strange had happened. The two of them had heard strange noises from the woods around them, but no one was ever able to explain it. The feeling that something was off, that something had been lurking near the river, would stick with them for years to come. But there was one story my friend shared that shook me to the core. A story about a hand, the severed hand, the loggers, and the tree. A few years ago, one of the officers I spoke to shared a chilling tale. It happened when the park had sold off some land to a logging company. The loggers were clearing a plot of land, and something they discovered under a felled tree set off an investigation that would never see the light of day. The loggers had cut down a tree, and when they sawed through the trunk, they found something odd. Something that made everyone freeze in place. Inside the tree, fused into the wood, was a fresh human hand. It wasn't mummified or skeletal. It was brand new, still warm, and fused into the tree itself. The loggers, in complete disbelief, called the police, and the rangers were sent in to investigate. The hand was removed and the area sealed off. The police were baffled, but the investigation went nowhere. No answers were ever found. It remains one of the park's most disturbing mysteries. Why you should never ignore the unexplainable. I've had my share of strange encounters, but hearing these stories really hit home the point that you can never let your guard down out there. Whether it's the backflipping man in the woods, the severed hand fused in the tree, or the unsettling story of the boy near the river. It's all part of something that just doesn't fit into the normal world. I'm not saying I have an explanation for any of this. It's not my job to come up with theories. What I do know is that out there, in the woods, there's more than meets the eye. And that's why I'm sharing these stories. I want to make sure you stay safe. The woods can be a beautiful place, but they can also hide things that shouldn't be there, and you can never be too careful. The two-legged deer and the Wendigo feeling. So, we were camping by a river in the woods, just a couple of kids messing around and having fun. But as the night went on, things took a strange and terrifying turn. We were sitting by the fire, talking and joking, when I noticed something moving across the river. From where we were, it looked like a deer, just a regular animal wading into the water. But as it got closer, I saw antlers and thought, okay, it's a buck. But then something strange happened. The deer kept walking, heading straight toward us. At this point, I knew something wasn't right. I asked Nolan what we should do, but he just kept staring at the fire, whispering to me to ignore it. He had this weird expression, and it freaked me out. I couldn't take my eyes off it, and when it reached the bank, I realized it wasn't a deer. It was walking on two legs. I froze. My heart was racing, and Nolan just yanked me back down to the ground, telling me to keep quiet, to not speak to it. And that's when I saw its eyes. Cloudy, milky, like something out of a nightmare. They weren't human eyes, not by a long shot, and they seemed to float above Nolan's head. Then I saw antlers, but not like a deer's. These were wrong, like they were part of the creature, not an animal. I couldn't move, couldn't even breathe. I remember hearing it make a low sound, like talking, but it wasn't words. Then, Nolan and I bolted. We ran as fast as we could back to camp. My pants were soaked from fear, but I didn't care. We didn't sleep that night. Nolan's grandpa had warned him, never talk to anything out there, especially when it calls for help. It stayed with me, that hunger, that feeling of something wrong. It reminded me of the Wendigo, the spirit of the lonely places. When you're out in the woods, that craving hits you, a hunger you can't explain, gnawing at your gut. The faceless man in the park, I've talked about the things I've seen, creepy things, unsolved mysteries. But I heard something from a friend that truly gave me chills. He's a guy I trust, worked in a park doing repairs. He had a strange encounter with a man who didn't quite fit in. This man approached him while he was painting an info booth, and he asked for directions to a campsite. My friend didn't think much of it. He told the guy to head down the road about 4 miles to find another park. But when he went back to painting, he realized something wasn't right. He could smell something. Old period blood. He looked around, but there was nothing. Just the smell. He tried to shake it off and keep working, but the guy hadn't left. The hairs on his neck stood up, and he asked again if the man needed help. But then, when he turned to look, it wasn't a man anymore. It was faceless, no face, just smooth, concave skin. No features. It freaked him out. His heart raced, his breath caught in his throat. He couldn't even comprehend what he was seeing. He blinked, and then, just like that, the guy looked normal again, like nothing happened. The man asked again for directions, but by then, my friend was getting seriously creeped out. There was no way this guy got out here without knowing where he was, so he offered to call him a taxi instead of driving him in the company vehicle. But the guy refused, and just walked off, into the trees. My friend didn't waste any time. He got in his truck and left. As he looked in his rearview mirror, he saw the guy standing at the edge of the trees, staring at him. And then, right before he turned the corner, the man just dissolved. He didn't walk back into the woods. He vanished. What's out there? These stories, whether they're about the Wendigo, the faceless man, or the weird things we see while out on SAR calls, have one thing in common. They leave you with more questions than answers. If you're out in the wilderness, remember, don't be too sure about what's out there. It's easy to write off strange feelings, weird creatures, or things that don't make sense. But once you start questioning, there's no going back. And sometimes, just sometimes, it's better not to know what's really out there. The giant face encounter. This one guy at the campfire started telling a story, and it really creeped me out. He said, I was out on a trail scouting, totally alone, just doing my thing. I hadn't seen anyone for hours, so I wasn't really paying attention, just looking at the ground, trying to figure out where the trail would run through. Then, out of nowhere, I come over this little hill and almost walk right into a guy. He was older, probably in his 60s, so I started to apologize for running into him. But then I stopped, and I just stared. It took me a second to figure out what was wrong, but his face, it was massive. He paused, and we all kind of waited for him to explain. I mean, it wasn't that his head was big, it was just his face. It took up too much of his head. Like if you took someone's face and just stretched it, enlarged it, 2 times the normal size. His eyes were normal, but the face, it was all wrong. The man didn't say anything, just stood there looking at him. He backed up, muttered more apologies, and hurried around the guy to get out of there. I kept looking behind me the whole way, he continued. I just kept expecting him to pop up behind me or something. I know it sounds crazy, but it was one of the creepiest things I've ever seen. Something about that face just didn't belong out there. The stairs that shouldn't be there. As the night went on, we started talking about the infamous stairs that have appeared in some of our searches. There's always that one person who doesn't want to talk about it, but once I broke the ice with a story of my own, someone else shared their experience. A couple of years ago, I went camping with my girlfriend. It was out about 2 miles from the road, this place I know. Everything was fine at first, except for this grinding noise. It sounded like teeth grinding, like my brother used to do when he slept. But it was constant. My girlfriend was freaked out, but I told her to ignore it. I've heard it before. It always stops after a while. He took a drink, clearly uneasy now. Eventually, I got her to sleep, but I woke up a couple hours later. Something felt off. I turned over and she wasn't in the tent, so I bolted out, calling her name. Didn't have to go far. She was standing at the edge of the camp, staring at something in the trees. She was pale, her eyes wide open, but she was dead asleep. It was like she wasn't even there. The firelight flickered as he paused, reliving the moment. I tried to lead her back, but she wouldn't move. She was whispering, "I have to go now, Eddie. I have to go, it's here." At first, I thought she was sleepwalking, but she wouldn't come back to bed. She was so still, staring off into the trees. And that's when I saw it, right there in front of us, about 15 yards away. The rest of us leaned in, almost afraid to hear the next part. It was a staircase, just standing there in the woods, a gray concrete one, like the kind you'd find in a building. No idea why it was there. I tried to pull her away, but she started walking toward it, like it was calling her. I yanked her back hard, and she woke up, looking at me like I was out of my mind. He shivered. She didn't remember anything. I didn't tell her what I saw. She just thought she was sleepwalking. We went back to the tent, and I don't think I've ever been that freaked out. I don't like thinking about it. I really don't. The missing kids report. Then another guy in our group piped up. He brought up a case about a kid who'd gone missing, a kid with a mental condition, something like Down syndrome. He was found a week after disappearing, and the report was strange. The guy paused and said, I got to read his report when they found him. It was messed up. It wasn't just the typical stuff you'd expect. Some of it, I don't know how much of it was real, but some of it, it's hard to imagine he made that up. Like what? We asked. Like he described being in the woods, completely alone. He said he'd wandered off the trail, and then he talked about meeting someone. A man who wasn't quite right. He said this guy, this thing, had no face. It wasn't that he was faceless, it was like his face was smooth, just blank. He said the man took him to a place in the woods, somewhere deep and hidden. The weird part is that when he came back, he didn't really seem that scared. It was like he had been taken but also cared for. The guy shuddered. The kid said he didn't know how long he was gone. He couldn't explain why he wasn't hungry or thirsty. And when they found him, he had a strange look on his face, like he didn't know what was real anymore. And when I read the report, it said he just disappeared after that. No one ever saw him again. Conclusion. These stories don't always have answers. Sometimes we see things we can't explain. Sometimes people disappear, and we don't know why. But if there's one thing I've learned out here, it's that there's a lot more going on than any of us can explain. There are things in these woods, in these parks, that don't belong, and we have to be careful, because once you start asking questions, there's no going back. And who knows what's really out there? Maybe it's better not to ask. The last story, a warning from the woods. I'll be honest with you, this is likely my final post. The things I've shared here, the things I've seen and heard while working in the wilderness, have garnered more attention than I anticipated. And now it's catching up with me. The higher-ups are aware of the stories, and while they don't say it outright, I can tell they're unhappy. I've been told, officially, that I can't speak about certain things anymore, not even a word. The warnings are clear, and they're serious. The consequences could be catastrophic. It's not just about keeping my job. It's more than that. I've been asked to stop talking about the stairs, the black-eyed figures, the faceless men, everything that has become part of the stories surrounding this park. They say it's too dangerous for others to know about. I think it's because there's something they don't want people to understand, something that's been hidden for a long time, and once you start acknowledging it, it doesn't go away. But I have to say this before I go. Not just for me, but for everyone else out there. We have to be careful. I've learned that firsthand. The stairs and the lost boy. The last time I heard something about the stairs, it was from a young boy who had gone missing for over a week. The cops didn't know what to make of it, and frankly, neither did I. When they found him, there was nothing wrong with him. He was healthy, well-fed, and completely unscathed. But when they questioned him, the story he told was disturbing, to say the least. They asked him where he had been, and he kept pointing to himself, as if he hadn't left at all. The way he described it didn't make sense. He talked about the stairs. He said they came to him, and that he had to go up them or something bad would happen. He didn't explain exactly what happened, but he mentioned loud sounds, things he couldn't hear, and just kept repeating, like the campfire. It was strange, like he was in some kind of trance. The cops thought it might be amnesia or some kind of fugue state, but there were no signs of trauma. The boy came back with no explanation. He was healthy and well-fed, but he couldn't remember where he'd been. As far as I know, the authorities dismissed it as a case of a lost child who was confused and a little disoriented from the experience. But I can tell you, there's no way that was all it was. That boy's story stays with me, and I can't stop wondering about the stairs. The dread of the woods. More stories have been circulating, and some of them are beyond explanation. I've heard about missing children found in caves, squeezed into impossibly tight spaces, and others found on mountain peaks, miles away from where they disappeared. They're always without shoes, without socks. Yet their clothes are perfectly intact, as though nothing ever happened. It's unsettling, to say the least. And then there are the reports of the black-eyed people. These are the ones who wander around the woods at night, calling out in strange voices, mimicking the sounds of animals. A man came to me once, describing how he had been camping, and something scratched at his tent. He thought it was a raccoon or a fox, but when it pressed its face against the fabric, he saw a human nose and mouth, just enough for him to kick at it and scare it away. When he went outside, gun in hand, there was no sign of it, just the noise of something retreating into the forest. But the weirdest part? The same thing showed up again. A figure standing there made of raw meat and hair. Its face was barely recognizable, just a mass of deformed flesh. It mimicked the sounds of his gunshot and even the sound of his zipper. It wasn't human. The climber who never was. Then there was the report from a young couple out hiking in the park. They'd noticed something strange on a peak I'm very familiar with. They were using binoculars, and the man saw a climber scaling a cliff without any equipment. No rope, no harness. The climber reached the top of the peak, waved at the man, and then, to their horror, snapped in half at the waist, leaping off the peak into the void. They never saw where he landed. I sent them on their way, assured them I'd look into it, but honestly, I won't be filing any report. There are too many stories like this. And what's worse is that I've stopped questioning it. This thing, the climber, he's been seen before, in the same place. I don't know what it is, and I don't want to. The last warning. I don't know if these stories help you, but I hope they do. If you're planning to go into the woods, to hike, to camp, do it safely. Bring supplies, let people know where you're going, and be prepared. Don't wander off the beaten path, especially not into uncharted areas. And above all, remember this. Don't touch them. Don't look at them. Don't go up them. Whatever's out there, whatever's waiting in the wilderness, it's not something you want to mess with. I can't keep sharing these stories, not anymore, but I want you to remember this warning. Stay safe. And if you see something you can't explain, just walk away. Don't go near it. Maybe someday I'll be able to share more. But for now, this has to be my last update. I'll be out there, still doing my job, still looking out for the people who venture into these woods. But I won't be telling anyone else about what's lurking out there. Take care, and remember, the woods have their secrets. Stay out of their way.
Stories may end, but the fear remains. Subscribe to uncover more secrets hidden in the darkness. Until we meet again in the world of nightmarish shadows.